particularly enjoyed the video we had earlier, which I loved it, and I think that they really packed the whole story in there in a few minutes and had a wonderful message at the end. Um, and this is just obviously this is chapter 2 in the whole book, what we're just about to read, and so it just gives us a little bit more of a spotlight on part of the whole book, the whole story. Are we likely to get to it or not, Paul?
No, it's saying that the PowerPoint's corrupted.
Okay. In that case, I will read it. I will read it from the Bible. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, when wine was brought to him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king and with the queen sitting beside him asked me, "How long will your journey take, and when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he'll give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I'll occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat, the Homerite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night I went out through the valley gate towards the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem which had been broken down and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. And then I moved on towards the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials didn't know where I'd gone or what I was doing, because as yet I'd said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me, and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Homerite and Tobiah the Ammonite, official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you're doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you've no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it." Thanks be to God. I was thinking this morning what it would be like if Jesus came in through the door this morning, and he. It would be great at this point to move aside and let him tell you what was on his heart for this church and what direction we should take. And I imagine that he would come in and he would thank Cecilia for playing the piano. He'd thank Mark for writing that song and listening. He'd thank Don for putting these songs together and leading our thoughts this morning. He'd thank each of you who came up with suggestions on the board, and the list would go on. And I think we'd probably be in awe of his presence here. The trouble is that I think when All Saints heard about it, they think, well, we would have quite liked him to come to us, and 1,000 other churches across the land would say, well, why didn't you come to us? So I suppose he's got another plan. Thankfully, by his Spirit, he's here with us this morning, and he is working in our hearts and minds to guide us through this process and to lead us. Now, I don't know whether people come to your mind who've been a good influence on your life, but I've been reminded this week of my headmaster at school, at senior school. It was an all-boys school, and we were very privileged to have a good headmaster, and he had a Christian faith. And one example I can remember of his leadership and made a difference in my life is that I quite like running, and we were down on the athletics track, and there were some boys in a race with me, and I thought they were some fairly good sporting people, and they were being encouraged by members of staff before the race. And then all of a sudden, the headmaster said, "I'm going to support Richard," and the impression was he knew my name, which I thought was amazing, and he even had thought that I'd got a chance in this race, and because of his interest and the fact that he knew who I was, it spurred me on, and I won the race, And recently he passed away, and this week I was sent some videos of other boys who'd spoken at his memorial service. And I discovered that before he went to the school of 600 boys, he learned all the names of pupils, and that he used to stand outside after assembly looking for the children that were sad, because he wanted it mattered, and so inspirational leaders. This morning we're looking at an inspirational leader, somebody who was put in the right place at the right time by God to do a job. Now, the story starts back in chapter 1, and when his brother comes to Nehemiah's brother comes and tells him about the state of Jerusalem and the walls and the city and how it's a disgrace to God, really. Nehemiah is brought to tears,
and his heart is broken for the disgrace of Jerusalem. And I think that is the first thing that comes to my mind in this story. And there may be things that are going on that you think are a disgrace to God and bring you to tears. Or if you don't pray, if you're not actually crying outwardly, you might be crying inwardly. But Nehemiah was somebody who believed that God could make a difference, and that there were things that could be done to change the situation, as we'll see. And I want us to look at some points. I don't know whether, Paul, we're able to get those points up I did on the slides.
The PowerPoint said it's corrupted. You can't put it to work.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's all right. Well, the first thing about Nehemiah, and I had it in red on the screen, is that he was a lover of God. And I believe the reason why he was a lover of God, or that shows through, is that he had a good job. He had a job which was perhaps one of the most respected jobs with the greatest leader of his day, someone who might be in Joe Biden's shoes. And because being a cupbearer and pouring wine meant he was putting his life on the line, because part of that job involved tasting the wine, and the king would see that if he didn't die, it was safe for him. So Nehemiah was somebody who showed his love for the king while laying down his life, potentially dying by taking what could be poisonous wine. Somebody that the king trusted. But he also took this great risk, didn't he, when he went to the king and asked for favours. But what we learn back in chapter 1 is that Nehemiah, the first thing he did was cry when he heard about it, and then he mourned and fasted and prayed before God. And the prayer goes like this: O Lord, God of heaven, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him. And pause there. He keeps his covenant of love with those who love him. Nehemiah recognized that the most important thing was that we love God. And that links to what Tim was preaching on earlier. The greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your mind, and all your soul. And that's what underpins this whole story. Because the reason why these walls are broken down, the reason why there are people, there is a foreign nation ruling over Jerusalem and Israel at the time, the reason why there's a disgrace there is because the people of Israel rejected God. They went their own way and they worshipped idols. They started to put other things in front of their love for God. And the thing that brings them back, the thing that underpins the rebuilding of the walls, is Nehemiah's love for God. It's more important to go and put this city right. It's more important to go and get that right than it is to have some posh job serving the king. He's got his priorities right. And I think why I'm making such a big thing about this is the only motive really behind what we do. This morning, the only motive that really counts behind this service, coming to church and serving God, is out of a love for him. It's what, if we build on that greatest commandment, then what we're building will be right. When Paul last week spoke about going out and sharing the gospel and Tim went on and spoke about loving others in our community. It stems from our love for God. It's out of this deep, deep love for God that we build something that lasts, something that matters, something, and that's where this whole rebuilding is coming out of. I want to say the second thing about Nehemiah is that he was a man of prayer. And you said some wonderful things earlier when Dominic asked the question. Elizabeth brought up prayer. And it's got to be at the heart of what we do, talking to God. The fact that it was successful, what Nehemiah did, started off with prayer. And it also started off with prayer and fasting. There was passion in what he was doing. It wasn't half-hearted. In his prayer, he goes on actually to confess the sins that the people of Israel have done. But he's pleading that that God would honour his commandment to love those who love him and who obey him. And if you remember, Jesus said, "Those who love me will obey me." Again, it stems out of a love for Christ and a love for God. The third thing I want to say about Nehemiah is that he was a brave believer. So he believed and trusted God in the process that he went out and did. And he was brave. The fact, I also think that you could say that he was an optimist in the sense that he saw the potential. He didn't look at the problems. We've got to face it, that it's perhaps hundreds of years since things went wrong for Israel, and it's been a long, long time that this disgrace has been upon the people of God and the people of Israel. It's got to this point where the people are turning back to God, and their hearts are right to rebuild the city. And against whatever opposition came upon it, it didn't put Nehemiah off. A bit like David, the whole people were, when Goliath was raging around with his threats, the whole people of Israel seemed to be frightened and scared. But David wasn't frightened and scared. He stood up against Goliath. He saw the power of God was bigger than the power of this world. These qualities are really important when we set about doing God's work. Seeing the potential, seeing the power of God is far bigger than the problems. And Nehemiah was a man to inspire that in people. That's the next thing I want to bring on, is the quality of inspiration he brought to the process. How he managed to take all those people, and we know, because we've just shared things with Dominic, we know what is at the heart of church life, but and what matters. But we need to put those things into practice and do them. And the quality of leadership that Nehemiah brings here is that probably people knew how to rebuild these walls. It was just that they needed someone to come along, authorized by the king, who was brave enough to get that authorization, and then to show them and come up with a strategic plan that worked, and to say, look, if you just do that section, you just do that bit, you just the other, together we can rebuild these walls. It looks a big job, but just you do this bit, you do that bit, and we will get there together. And that's the same in church life. This church has a wonderful history. I don't know how much you know of the history, but we celebrated some years ago the 350th anniversary of this church, and at a time when there was a freedom to allow the dissenting churches, perhaps Puritan, Protestant, Baptist-type churches to form when after the Civil War in 1657, I think, a group of about 24 people formed this church, and they set apart, I think it was a man called John Coombs to be their leader and preacher at the time, and then someone called Richard Steed. And these men guided the church and enabled it to grow. Richard Steed was imprisoned in Reading Jail for his faith when there was an attempt to suppress non-recognised churches, if you like. And in 1761, I'll read to you the state of the church in 1761. It says here, the church was in such a state of affairs that not only were there no worshippers, a later pastor said that the place of worship was used for menial purposes. The pews were torn up and thrown to one end of the chapel, while the other end was used as a stable. But a man called Abraham Atkins he was involved in quite a few churches, and another local church were involved in rebuilding the church and keeping it going and helping it to grow again, to the extent that in Victorian times, Charles Spurgeon, who is known as a renowned preacher, came to Farringdon Baptist Church and preached here, and the church grew, and the membership was, considering the size of the town, up to over 90 in the late 1800s, and up until the First World War, there was a great revival in the church. In about 1880, they built a building next door for the children's work, and they had hundreds of children who used to come to Sunday school, and so there was a lot going on. This important people saved the church, and the gospel went on, and people were able to love God and know about the love of God through what happened. It's been through another time of dipping down. I know there's some people who are involved in the church today who will remember the church in the 1960s, and from what I'm told, I don't obviously remember it, but I think there was actually a room out the back here, and they used to hold, the people who were part of the church actually met out there, and the building was in such a poor state of repair. Particularly in the early 80s, the church hall roof was so bad it was leaking, and there were people in the early 1980s who actually restored the roof, made a flat roof, and gradually we moved back into the church, and during the 1990s we moved into a school and outgrew this chapel. God's hand was on the church, and when we came to the church, what stuck out to me was the love for God that people had. And I believe that the perseverance and the hard work that people have done then and are doing today stemmed out of that love for God. And that's what struck me when we came to church. This was a community that wanted to be involved with because they loved God. They wanted others to know about that love. They were in touch with the Lord Jesus Christ, and the Spirit of God was at work. And I want to say that these are the things that I believe underpin the rebuilding of the church, or the going on of the church, the expansion of the church. These are the things that will make us strong in the future, that they make us strong today, and that we need to build on. There are many decisions as a church we can take. We can decide to have coffee before the service, coffee after the service. We can decide to come, like perhaps we might have done in the past, in a suit and tie, or more casually dressed as we choose today. We can have old hymns, we can have modern choruses of worship. We can meet here, or we can meet in the town outside. There are many decisions that, as a church, that are important and we need to take. But I believe that the thing that matters most is that we love God, and that out of that love comes a love for one another, and out of that stems everything that we do. So let's get the basics right. Let's concentrate, as we said earlier, on changing ourselves, getting ourselves orientated. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Orientate our lives right, and the rest will fall into place. God honours those who love him, and he works with those who love him. There aren't any problems that are too big for God. There aren't any walls that are too badly destroyed that he can't rebuild them. The thing that matters is we trust him, put our faith in him, and allow him to work in us. So, thank you, and I think we're going to sing a song